Dana Merrick had carried banquet trays at the Alderman Hotel for 6 years. On the night this happened, she stood in the back hallway at 5:40 and listened to a man read out her section like it was a punishment. Tables 12 and 14. The Overflow, against the kitchen wall. The section nobody is meant to be seen working. She did not argue. She double-knotted her apron. She slid 2 fingers into her pocket and touched the corner of a laminated card she'd made herself. And she checked it, the way she always did, before she said a single word to anyone. Then, the event manager said the thing he said. He didn't lower his voice. He wasn't even looking at her. "Put the waitress on the overflow table," he told the captain. "She won't know the difference." 9 servers heard it. It landed on the assignment sheet exactly where her name was printed. Here's the part nobody in that room could have guessed. By the second course, a guest at the head table would lean toward the captain and ask for the woman working the tables by the kitchen door, the one who told them what was actually in the sauce. But we're not there yet. If you've ever been the best on the floor and never once anyone's favorite, this story is for you. Before we go on, do me a favor, subscribe, and in the comments tell me the city you're serving from tonight. Waiting tables, driving, nursing, whatever it is. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, back to Dana. She was 37. 11 years in banquets, 6 of them here. She knew the sheet for that night the way some people know a prayer. BO number 4471. 300 covers. 38 dietary flags. A shrimp bisque to start, and a chicken supreme for the main, the kind that sounds plain on a menu and hides a knife. Because the chicken supreme that night was finished in a beurre blanc. And the beurre blanc was built on a shellfish stock. Dana knew that. She'd read it 3 days before anyone plated a thing. She could carry 14 plates, not stack them for show, carry them, up the arm, along the wrist, across a crowded floor, without setting a single one down wrong. In her second year, she'd gotten tired of squinting at printouts under the pass light, so she'd made her own allergen card. Colored tabs, shellfish in red, tree nuts in green, gluten, dairy, egg, each its own color, each its own line. She laminated it at the copy shop on a Sunday, and she'd carried it in her apron pocket every shift since. It had been in her pocket that afternoon. It was in her pocket when the man said she wouldn't know the difference. She'd been passed over for lead 3 times. And the reasons were not a mystery to her. She didn't manage up. That was the phrase they used, the ones who talked like that. She didn't laugh at the right jokes or drift toward the right shoulder in the break room. Second, she'd been on shift the night the last general manager walked out, the night Brett Coyle's boss quit in the parking lot, and somehow being there for the bad night stuck to her instead of to him. And third, she'd asked one question, one time, about the tip pool math. Just the math. Just how the numbers added up. She'd asked it quietly and politely, and she'd never been the same to management again. Lead paid $5.75 more an hour. She could tell you that figure without thinking. The way you can tell someone your own birthday. Because that number had a job to do. Her mother, Ruth, was 71, and she lived at Laurel Ridge. Memory care. The good kind. The kind with a garden the residents could actually walk in, and the kind that costs like it sounds. $4,900 a month. Dana's half was $2,450. And Laurel Ridge had sent a letter, the polite kind on heavy paper, saying the rate would go up the 1st of next month. Not a lot. Just enough. Just exactly enough that the lead differential, that $5.75 an hour, would have closed the gap and let her breathe. That was what the promotion was. It wasn't a title. It was her mother's garden. So when Brett Coyle read her the overflow section, he thought he was moving a name on a chart. He didn't know he was standing on top of a garden. Let me take you to 540, to the lineup, so you see it the way the 9 of them saw it. The pre-shift lineup happened in the service corridor behind the Riverview Ballroom, a long fluorescent hallway that smelled like coffee and sanitizer, and the ghost of every meal the kitchen had ever fired. The servers stood in a loose row. Marcus Hale, the captain, stood at the front with a clipboard he actually read. And Brett Coyle stood next to him with a tablet he read, instead of reading faces. That was the thing about Brett. He ran the room by looking at the head table, and never once at the floor. He managed toward the client, and treated the servers like chairs you could move around, all the same, all replaceable. He had a nice suit and a nicer watch, and a way of saying your name that made you feel like he'd already forgotten it. He started reading sections off the tablet. Kayla, center, the apprentice girl, 24, barely a year in, and she got the center marquee section, the tables right under the chandeliers where the light is good, and the guests are happy, and the tips are soft as bread. 2 of the men got the head table, prestige, the dais, the section you brag about, and then he came to the overflow, tables 12 and 14, the 2 against the kitchen wall, hard by the swinging door, no sightline to the stage, the tables the hotel apologizes for when it seats people there. He looked at the tablet, he said her name. Then he turned his head, just slightly toward Marcus, and he said it. Put the waitress on the overflow table. She won't know the difference. Not quietly. He said it the way you'd say the weather. And the hallway went a particular kind of still. The still of 9 people, all deciding at the same second to look at the floor. Because they'd all heard it. And they all knew Dana. And they all did the math on what he just said about a woman who'd been carrying that room since before Kayla could legally pour wine. Marcus's jaw moved. He looked at Brett. He opened his mouth. And then he didn't say anything, which is a thing Marcus did, and a thing we're going to come back to. Dana didn't say anything either. She reached behind her, and she double-knotted her apron, a second knot on top of the first, the way she did before every service that was going to be long. She touched the card in her pocket. And then she picked up her tray jack and walked toward the back of the room, toward 12 and 14, and she did not give Brett Coyle the one thing he wasn't even aware he was fishing for, which was the sight of it landing. Now, while the room fills, let me show you 2 small things. Because the small things are the whole story, if you're paying attention. The first is the binder. In the banquet office, there was a fat 3-ring binder where every event order lived after the fact, the used ones, the run ones. And if you flip through it, if anyone ever did, you'd find that nearly every BO that hotel had executed for years was initialed in the corner in the same hand. D.M. Small square letters. Dana had run those rooms, 300 covers, 500 covers, the governor's prayer breakfast, the 2 weddings that overlapped on a Saturday and nearly went to war over the same coat check. D.M. in her own hand, filed away where no guest and no owner would ever think to look. And here's the second thing, mentioned to you now the way it was mentioned around the hotel, which is to say, like it was nothing. After every event, the client sent feedback. A note, a card, sometimes an email. And every one of those went to Brett Coyle first. He screened them. He decided which ones climbed the stairs to ownership and which ones died in his inbox. A couple of nice notes had come in over the years, Dana figured. Thank you notes. The kind guests write when a server made an evening feel like something. She figured they'd come in. She'd just never seen one. Not one. In 6 years. Sit with that for a second, because it's going to matter more than the chandeliers. The third small thing wasn't a thing you could file. It was a plate. Dana never ate before a big service. There wasn't time, and she'd stop pretending there was. So somewhere in the churn of setup, Marcus went back into the kitchen, and he came out with a plate covered in foil, and he set it down at Dana's station in the corridor, on the little shelf by the tray rail. He didn't say anything about it. He never did. He just left it there. Warm. Where she'd find it. Because he'd noticed years ago that she'd work straight through her own dinner and say she wasn't hungry, and he'd decided, quietly, that somebody in that building was going to make sure she ate. He'd never once told her he did it. She'd never once told him she knew. That was the whole shape of them. Two people leaving warm plates in the dark for each other and calling it the job. Then the doors opened. If you've never seen a ballroom fill for a real event, it's a kind of weather. The Riverview held 300 that night, and they came in all at once, the way water finds the low places. The chandeliers came up to full. The band tuned. 300 people in their good clothes, the men tugging collars, the women setting little handbags against the base of their chairs, the whole room turning gold under the lights, and loud in that happy way. The head table sat up on the dais at the front, the Rural Health Alliance and their people, the executive director and the incoming board, water poured, wine breathing. And back against the kitchen wall, next to the door that swung and banged all night, sat tables 12 and 14. The Overflow. The seats the front desk gives out with an apology. 2 round tops in the worst light in the room, close enough to the pass that you could smell every pull of the saucepan. Far enough from the stage that you'd need to lean into the aisle to see a speaker's face. That was Dana's whole world for the night. Brett walked the room once, the way he did, chin up, scanning the front, the client, the dais. On his way past the back, he slowed just long enough to say it, and he said it like he was doing her a kindness. "You'll barely have to talk to anyone back here." And he kept walking, toward the light, toward the people he thought were the only people in the room. He never saw her face. He'd have learned nothing from it if he had. Here's where a lot of people would let the hurt win. Where you'd let the shoulders drop and work the section like it deserved you, which is to say badly, because they'd already told you it didn't matter. Dana did the opposite, and I want you to watch how she did it, because it's the quietest, brave thing you'll see all night. She started, the way she always did, by reading her tables against the sheet. Not the food yet, the people. She stood at the corner of table 14 with the seating in her head, and she matched the place cards to the covers on BO 4471, seat by seat, the way she'd done 1,000 rooms. And at seat 3, table 14, something didn't line up. The place card at seat 3 didn't match what the sheet said should be back here. She read it twice. The name on the card belonged to someone who should have been up front, not Overflow. Front, someone the seating chart had put in the good light, and someone the printing, or the last-minute swap, or just plain carelessness, had dropped into the worst 2 tables in the building without anybody upstairs noticing. Somebody important had been buried in the back. And nobody knew but Dana. She could have flagged it. She could have found Brett and made it his problem and watched him not care. Instead, she made a decision, standing there with her hand on the back of an empty chair. And it was the decision the whole night turns on. She decided she was going to work the Overflow like it was the head table. Not out of spite, out of the only thing she had left that was hers. If they were going to hide people back here, then the people back here were going to get the best service in the room, because that was the one thing no assignment sheet could take away from her. So she went to work the way she worked. Water before it was empty, bread warm. Every question answered before it was asked. She learned her 12 guests at table 12, and her people at 14 in the first 10 minutes, learned who was cold and who was celebrating, and who wasn't drinking and didn't want to be asked why. She moved like the section was a stage, because to her, it was. Somewhere in the first course, between the bisque and the plates coming back, she caught something in the corridor out of the corner of her eye, and it pulled her off her line. It was Marcus. He'd stepped out of the flow, back by the ice well, and he had his right hand flat against the metal, and his jaw set in a way she knew. The wrist. He'd been a line cook before he was a captain, 10 years on the SOT station, and the wrist was the price of it. It went bad on him on the long nights, and a 300-cover banquet is nothing but a long night. He wasn't telling anyone. Of course he wasn't. He was standing in the corridor, pressing it to the cold and breathing through it and getting ready to go back out and carry the room with a hand that was quietly on fire. Nobody else noticed. In 6 years, as far as Dana could tell, Nobody else had ever noticed. He was the guy who noticed everyone and got noticed by no one, which, if you're keeping track, was a thing the two of them had painfully in common. She didn't make a speech about it. She went to the well, and she took a service towel off the stack, and she wrapped it around a scoop of ice, folded it into a long roll the way you'd make a compress, and she came up beside him, and she set it on his forearm, laid it right along the tendon. She didn't ask. She didn't say your wrist again or you should get that looked at. She just put the cold where it needed to go, and she let her hand rest on top of it for 1 second, maybe 2, holding it in place. Then she took her hand back and picked up her tray and went back to work. Marcus stood there with the ice on his arm and watched her push through the swinging door into the light of the ballroom. And whatever was on his face in that moment, it wasn't about his wrist anymore. I'm going to slow all the way down now, because we've arrived at the thing that changes everything, and I don't want you to miss a single second of it. It was the second course. The mains. And the mains, remember, were the chicken supreme, finished in a beurre blanc, built on a shellfish stock. 38 dietary flags in that room, and Dana carried all 38 in her head, like a second heartbeat. But there was one that mattered more than the rest, and it was at her own table. Table 12. Seat 6. A shellfish allergy. Not a preference. Not a lifestyle. The kind of allergy that has a number attached to it. The kind where the beurre blanc that everyone else calls dinner is. For one person at that table. A loaded thing on a plate. The kitchen fired table 12. 8 plates. And a runner brought the first push out toward the pass. And Dana was there, because Dana was always there. And she looked at the tickets and she looked at the plates, and she did the thing she'd been doing since her second year, with a laminated card and colored tabs. She read seat 6 against the sheet. And the plate coming for seat 6 had sauce on it. Now here's what you have to understand about that moment. The whole table looked right. 8 beautiful plates, glazed and garnished and steaming, ready to fly. In a busy room, on a fast pass, with a captain nursing a bad wrist and a manager watching the dice. 99 servers out of 100 send that table. It looks done. It looks correct. And the one plate at seat 6 that has a spoonful of shellfish stock sauce on it that should never have touched it, that plate goes out under the lights and lands in front of a person whose evening is about to become an ambulance. Dana stopped the plate at the pass. She didn't shout. She didn't make it a scene. That would have pulled every eye in the back of the room and turned a catch into a crisis, and Dana didn't work that way. She put her hand flat on the rail, and she said, low to the expo, that seat 6 was a shellfish flag, and the beurre blanc was a shellfish sauce, and that plate could not leave, and neither could the table, because you don't send 7 and hold 1. Not when the 1 is the reason. You refire the whole table so it lands together, and nobody at that table ever learns how close it came. And that's what she did. She reached into her apron and she pulled out the card. The laminated one. Colored tabs, shellfish in red. She set it on the tray rail where the kitchen could see it, red tab up, so there was no arguing, no we usually, no it's probably fine. She held table 12. All 8. She sent the mistake back. She stood at the pass, and she walked the refire through, plate by plate, a clean protein, a clean pan, a sauce that wasn't going to hurt anyone, and she held the other 7 hot, and she reran the 1, and she timed it so the whole table of 8 went out together. Gorgeous, on the beat, exactly like nothing on earth had happened. At table 12, seat 6, a person picked up a fork and ate a lovely dinner and laughed at something the woman beside her said, and never knew. Never knew that a server they hadn't looked at twice, at a table the hotel had apologized for, had just stood between them and the worst night of their life, and moved so quietly they'd remember the evening as nothing but pleasant. The room didn't know. The head table didn't know. Brett Coyle, watching the dace, arms loose at his sides, did not know. Marcus, out on the floor, with a wrist wrapped in a towel Dana had given him, hadn't seen it yet. You know. You're the only one who does. The card was still on the rail, red tab up, catching the pass light. Dana slid it back into her pocket, and she picked up her tray. And she pushed through the swinging door to carry a refired table of 8 into the worst light in the room like it was the finest thing she'd ever done. Because at seat 3 of table 14, a few feet away, a woman she hadn't placed yet was watching her work. A woman the seating chart had buried in the back by mistake. A woman who was about to ask Dana a very simple question about what exactly was in the sauce. And the answer Dana was about to give her, honestly, plainly, while every other server in that room said, "Oh, it's just a cream sauce," that answer was the second domino. The room still didn't know what it had in the back corner. It was about to start finding out. And the woman at seat 14, the one nobody upstairs could name, was the incoming chair of the board. Nell Boyd had been seated at table 14 by an error no one caught, and she had spent the first course noticing things. She noticed that the flowers on the overflow tables were real, not the silk ones she'd seen at these functions before. And she noticed that the server working the back corner moved differently than the others, with the particular economy of someone who has learned that rushing looks like confusion, and stillness looks like control. She noticed that when the first course arrived, the server had paused at the chair beside her, checked something in her pocket, and then said, quietly, to the gentleman at seat 2, that the bisque had shrimp, and she wanted to make sure he knew. The gentleman had thanked her. The server had nodded once, moved on. Nell had eaten the bisque and thought about it. So when the entree arrived and she looked at the plate, the golden surface of it, the fragrant reduction pooled at the edge, she asked the question she always asked at events where the food came from, somewhere she couldn't see. "What's in the sauce?" She had asked this question at 41 dinners in the past 6 years and received the same answer 41 times. A version of some variation of cream, some wine. "It's very good. You'll love it." The server at the next table over, working the section she could see from her seat, had already said something like it to a woman in red. Dana said, "Beurre blanc." The base is a shellfish reduction. It's built on the bisque stock, the same shrimp bisque from the first course. The finish is butter and tarragon. If you have a shellfish sensitivity, I can get you the chicken taken off separately and finished in a plain butter. That would take about 8 minutes, and it would still be hot. Nell Boyd put down her fork. Not because she had an allergy. Because of the way the answer had arrived. No hesitation. No check with the kitchen. No, the chef uses a special blend. Just the facts of the thing, laid out in the order you'd need them to make a decision. The way a doctor talks to you when they have actually read your chart. "No sensitivity," Nell said. "I was just curious." Dana said, "The tarragon is fresh. They trim it this afternoon." And she moved to the next cover. Nell picked her fork back up and ate and watched the room. The way she always watched rooms, cataloging. Across the ballroom, the chandeliers lit the center section in warm gold. The servers over there moved through the good light, with the ease of people who knew they were being looked at. Back here, the light was flatter, serviceable, the kind that doesn't flatter anyone. The woman working this corner had been working it like she'd been given the best seat in the house. At the table beside her, the deputy director leaned in, Gerald, who actually did have a shellfish thing, mild but real. The kind he usually just powered through because making a fuss felt worse than the discomfort. He'd heard the exchange. He looked at his plate. Dana was at his shoulder before he'd finished forming the question. "Yours is already off," she said. "Plain butter. I had them hold one when I saw your flag on the BO. It's been resting. Are you ready for it now, or do you want a minute?" Gerald set down his fork and looked up at her. "You held one?" "Yes, before I asked." "The flag was on the sheet," she said, and said it like it was nothing. Like, of course, like what else would you do with the information? She set the plate in front of him, and it was, in fact, still hot. He would tell 3 people about it before the evening was over. The first was the woman beside him, who happened to be Nell. The second was the man across the table, who laughed and said he'd noticed her too. The third was Gordon Vance, at 7:15, when Vance's own table had come apart at the seams, and Marcus Hale was standing 3 feet away, trying to redistribute 4 servers across a surprise toast rearrangement, and not quite managing it. And Gerald leaned across the aisle and said, "Find the woman from the back tables. Find the one who knows what's in the sauce." But that was 7:10. It was not yet 7:10. Right now it was 6:48, and Dana was in the corridor between the ballroom and the kitchen, shoulders against the wall, standing next to Marcus over the open BO binder balanced between them. He had the floor plan side. She had the cover counts. They were talking through the second course timing, and their arms were close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of him, and neither of them mentioned it. 12 and 14 are clean, she said. Head table's about to get complicated. He tipped the binder toward her, a column of names she already knew, the toast order that hadn't been on the original run of show. His finger tracked down the column. Her finger tracked with it. They stopped at the same line at the same moment. Neither of them moved their hand. Neither of them moved their hand. For 1 second, maybe 2, her finger rested against the side of his on the page, warm paper between them and the toast order underneath, and the swinging door thumped somewhere behind them, and a tray clattered in the kitchen, and neither of them looked up. Then Marcus cleared his throat. "Second course fires at 7, he said. "I know." "Right." He slid the binder toward her a half-inch, and his hand came away, and the moment closed like a drawer. She wanted to say something. She didn't. 11 years had taught her that the things you don't say in a corridor keep. The things you say too fast, you spend. So she squared the binder against her hip and told him table 14 would need Water's top before the entrees ran, and he said he'd send Kayla, and she said no, she'd do it herself, and he looked at her a beat too long and let it go. She went back through the swinging door into the ballroom. The Riverview Ballroom was full now. 300 covers, every chair filled. The chandeliers turned all the way up so the whole room glittered like something you'd pay to look at. Up front, on the dais, the head table sat under the brightest of the lights, Gordon Vance in the center seat, 2 men in good suits on either side, a microphone on a short stand that nobody had touched yet. And back where Dana worked, against the kitchen wall, the light was thinner. The swinging door breathed hot air on her neck every time it opened. Table 12. Table 14. The section guests apologized for being seated at. She topped the waters. She read the room the way she always read it. And at 7 o'clock the second course fired, and for 10 minutes everything ran clean, and she let herself think, just for a second, that the night might simply end. It was 7:10 when it came apart at the front of the room. She saw it before she heard it. A ripple at the head table. One of the suited men stood too early, glass in hand, and the man beside him stood to stop him, and a runner came in with the wrong tray, and Vance turned in his seat looking for someone and not finding him. The toast order had changed. Somebody upstairs had rearranged the speaking order sometime after the printed run of show, and nobody had told the floor. And now the dais was firing dessert and pouring sparkling and cueing a speaker all at the same time, and there were not enough hands. Marcus was in the middle of it. She could see him from across the room, moving fast, one hand up, trying to peel 2 servers off the perimeter and steer them toward the front. But 2 servers weren't enough. The head table had gone from a station to a fire, and the captain was one man with a bad wrist, and the client was watching his own event stumble in front of the people he'd invited. Vance leaned toward Marcus, said something short. Marcus shook his head, apologized, kept moving. Vance said it again, sharper this time, and this time Dana was close enough on her water rounds to hear it carry. No, not one of them. Vance's finger came up, and it pointed, not at the front of the room, but at the back, at the kitchen wall. The woman working the tables by the door. The one who told our board chair what was actually in the sauce. Get her. Marcus went still. For a second he just stood there with a bottle in his hand, and Dana watched something move across his face that she'd never seen on it in 6 years. It wasn't surprise. It was closer to grief, and closer than that to shame, and closest of all to a decision. He set the bottle down on the nearest tray. He crossed the room. Not around the edge, the way service always moved. Straight up the center aisle, past Kayla's marquee section. Past the good tables under the good light, the whole length of the ballroom, to the kitchen wall where they kept the people they didn't want seen. He stopped in front of her. "Dana," his voice was low and even. "Head table needs you." Now. She looked at him. "Me? You? He asked for you. He asked for the woman who knows what's in the sauce." Marcus held her eyes. "That's not me." And she understood, standing there with a water pitcher sweating in her hand, that this was not a small thing he was doing. He could have taken it. Vance had asked the captain, and the captain could have gone up himself and done a passable job and let the client believe the house had saved the house. Instead, he'd walked the whole floor to come get her. She set the pitcher down. She wiped her hand on the towel at her waist, and she walked up the center aisle behind him, into the bright light, past the tables full of people who 2 hours ago had watched her get walked the other way. She felt them notice. The head table was a mess when she reached it, but it was a mess she could read. 10 seconds. That was all it took. The dessert had fired before the coffee was down. The speaker was standing without a poured glass in front of him. 2 covers were still holding entree plates that should have been cleared a course ago. The whole rhythm of the table had jumped its track, and everybody on it could feel it, and nobody on it knew how to fix it. She fixed it. She didn't announce herself. She didn't apologize. She started at the far end and moved in, and she pulled the entree plates that shouldn't have been there and stacked them clean up her arm. And she got a poured glass in front of the standing speaker before he'd finished shifting his weight, and she caught the dessert runner at the corner and turned him a quarter step, so the plates went down in service order instead of all at once. And she read the toast order off the little folded card by Vance's elbow that everyone else had missed, and she leaned in and said one quiet sentence to the man who was about to speak. "You're third, not first. There's time. Sit until she nods." He sat. 45 seconds. Maybe a minute. The head table went from a fire to a table again, and the only people who knew how close it had come were the ones sitting at it. Vance watched her the whole time. When the last plate was down, and the last glass was full, and the table had gone smooth under her hands like water finding its level, he said, "What's your name?" And Dana, who had wanted for 6 years to hear someone at a table like this ask her exactly that, felt the question land, and felt how strange it was that it had come from a stranger before it ever came from the people she worked for. She opened her mouth to answer. "She's got it handled." Brett's voice came in from the side, smooth, bright, already smiling. "Thank you, Dana. We'll take it from here. Back to your section." He put a light hand on her shoulder, the kind of touch that looks like warmth from 3 feet away and feels like a leash up close, and he turned to Vance with the smile turned all the way up. "My team's got you, Mr. Vance. Apologies for the hiccup. Won't happen again." Vance looked at Brett, looked at Dana. Something crossed his face and didn't quite finish, but the room was moving. The speaker was standing again. The moment folded shut. And Dana, because 11 years had taught her exactly what happens to a server who argues at the head table in front of the client, stepped back. She did not say her name. She did not say anything. She walked back down the aisle, the long way this time, the service way, around the edge, into the thin light against the kitchen wall. Brett caught Marcus at the swinging door on her way past. "Good save," Brett said. "We handled the overflow. Nice teamwork. We handled it." Dana heard it going through the door. She didn't stop. She topped a water at table 14 with a hand that was almost steady, and she thought, there it is. There it always is. Marcus stands right there and lets it become we, lets it become the team, lets it become Brett's, the same way it had been 3 times before. She hadn't seen his face when he said it. She didn't need to. She knew the shape of this. She'd been standing in this exact spot inside it her whole career. The lead differential was $5.75 an hour. Her mother's care was $4,900 a month, and the raise took effect the first, and her half was $24.50, and the gap was the gap, and it was not going to close tonight or any other night, because doing it right and getting credited for it were two different accounts, and always would be. She refilled the water. She checked the card in her apron pocket without taking it out. A habit. A small hard rectangle against her hip. She went back to work. What she didn't see, because she'd gone through the door, was Marcus standing there after Brett walked off. She didn't see him look at the swinging door she'd disappeared through. She didn't see him look down at the incident log clipped to the board by the pass. The log that got filled out after every event. The log that recorded what went wrong and who caught it. The log that had been blank all night because nobody ever wrote down a thing that a server prevented before a guest could feel it. She didn't see him pick up the pen. The closing remarks started at 8. Vance spoke first. The usual things. Thank you for coming. A good year for the Alliance. Rural clinics. Telehealth in the counties without a hospital. The numbers going the right direction. 300 people half listening over coffee. Then he said, "Before I sit down, I'm going to do something a little off the program." And he looked toward the overflow tables against the kitchen wall. And he said, "I'd like our incoming board chair to say a word." Nell, at table 14, the section nobody was meant to be seen in, a woman stood. Eleanor Boyd, 58. Seated back here all night, by a seating error nobody upstairs had ever caught. A runner brought her the microphone, and she took it, and she looked out at the room for a moment before she spoke, and when she did her voice was plain and unhurried, the voice of a woman who ran meetings for a living. "I'll be brief," Nell said. "I've been to a lot of these dinners. This is my 42nd, I think, if I'm counting right." A small laugh in the room. "And I want to tell you about my table." She let that sit. "I was seated back here, in the corner by the kitchen door." She said it without complaint, almost with amusement, which, I'll be honest, is not where the incoming chair usually ends up. Somebody made a mistake on a chart. It happens. Another small laugh, thinner this time. A few heads turned toward the back. Dana stood very still against the wall. "But here's what I want to say." Nell's voice changed, just slightly, went down a register into something the whole room leaned toward. The woman working these back tables tonight is the only person in 42 of these dinners who ever answered a real question with a real answer. I asked her what was in the sauce. Because I ask, at every one of these, and at every one of these somebody smiles and says a lovely butter sauce and moves on. A pause. She told me it was a beurre blanc built on shellfish stock. She told me where the cross-contact risk was. She told me which plates on the table she'd already changed, and why. The room had gone quiet now. The real kind of quiet. And I found out afterward, Nell said, that earlier this evening, at the next table over, a guest with a shellfish allergy was about to be served that exact sauce. And that this same woman caught it. At the pass. And that she quietly remade an entire table of 8 so that not one of those guests ever knew how close it came. She looked around the room. 8 plates. Pulled and remade. In the middle of a 300-cover dinner. And the guest who could have ended the night in an emergency room finished his meal without ever knowing there was anything to know. She let the silence stretch. "I've spent my career around people who do the visible thing well," Nell said. "Tonight I watched somebody do the invisible thing perfectly, at a table the hotel uses to hide people. So I'd like the room to know her name. Because I don't. Nobody up here does. And that seems to me like exactly the problem." She turned toward the back, toward Dana. And Gordon Vance, at the head table, leaned into his own microphone and said it. Not the manager, the client. Dana Merrick. 300 people turned to look at the woman against the kitchen wall. Dana stood in the thin light with a folded towel in her hand and heard her own name come off the dais and roll out over the whole bright room. And she did not know what to do with her face, so she did the only thing 11 years had left her able to do. She nodded once, the way you nod when a table thanks you, and she kept her hand steady on the towel, and she did not cry, though something behind her ribs had come loose and was moving. At the tables under the good light, the guests who had watched her get walked to the kitchen wall clapped. Kayla Prentice, standing at the edge of her marquee section, watched the whole thing with her mouth slightly open. And by the swinging door, Marcus Hale stood with the incident log against his chest and watched Dana hear her name. And his jaw was tight, and he was not clapping, because his hands were full. The staff debrief was at 9:30, back of house, under the fluorescent lights by the coffee urns. 9 servers. Marcus, Brett, the same 9 servers who'd been standing in the same back hallway at 5:40 when Brett read the sections off his tablet and said the thing he said. The room smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. Everyone was tired in the specific way you get tired after a 300 cover night. The standing up tired. The feet gone tired. Brett clapped his hands once. Okay, good night, everybody. Really good night. That's what a team looks like. He was already halfway to the exit in his head. We had a couple curveballs on the head table, and we handled them. That's the job. Great team effort all around. Great team night. Dana looked at the floor. She knew this part. This was the part where it became the team, and the team became the house. And the house became Brett, and everyone nodded and went home. She'd stood through it before. She could stand through it again. Her feet hurt, and her mother's raise took effect the first, and she wanted to go home. It wasn't the team. Marcus's voice. Flat, loud enough. The room turned. Brett's smile stayed on his face a second past where it belonged. Sorry? Brett said. Marcus stepped forward. He had the incident log in his hand. I said it wasn't the team. I want to be clear about it, because I've watched it not be clear for 6 years, and that's on me. He looked around the room at the 9 faces, at the servers who'd heard the 5:40 line. Table 12, seat 6, shellfish allergy on the flag. The chicken supreme fires in a beurre blanc built on shellfish stock. That plate was going out. It would have gone out, and that guest would have gone to the hospital, and it would have been in the paper as a hotel that put a man in an ambulance. Nobody moved. Dana caught it at the pass, Marcus said. She pulled the plate. She refired the whole table. 8 covers. In the middle of the busiest night we've run this year. And she did it so clean that not one guest at that table ever knew. He turned and looked straight at Brett. That's not the team. That's not us. That's her. Her name is Dana Merrick. And I'm putting it in the log. Because I should have put it in the log the last 3 times and I didn't. He set the log down on the steel counter, uncapped the pen, and wrote. The whole room heard the pen on the paper. He wrote her name, and the table number, and the word he'd never written before, which was caught. And he initialed it, MH, next to the DM. That was in the binder in the office on every BO she'd ever run, and that nobody had ever once looked at. He capped the pen. 6 years, he said, quieter now to the room, but really to her. You've been the best server on this floor for 6 years, and I let it be a secret, because keeping quiet was easier than making trouble. That's not loyalty. I told myself it was. It wasn't. Brett's face had gone through several things and settled on none of them. Marcus, he started, I don't think this is the... It's already done, Marcus said. It's in the log. Ownership reads the log. And the 9 servers who had heard she won't know the difference at 5:40 looked at Dana Merrick one at a time, and not one of them looked away. Dana didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been too small. She just met Marcus's eyes across the fluorescent light and the coffee smell. And she let him see that she'd heard it. All of it. The we handled it in the doorway that she'd gotten wrong. The log. The 6 years. He'd walked the whole floor to get her. She'd been so sure he was letting it become the team, and he'd been standing right there with a pen the whole time. The debrief broke up. The servers filed out. Brett left fast and didn't say goodnight. Dana was the last one in the ballroom, breaking down her section, when she found Marcus in the corridor. He was leaning against the wall by the tray rail, and he had his sleeve pushed up, and he was pressing the heel of his other hand into his right wrist, the way he did at the end of every long night. The old line cook injury that flared when he'd been on the floor too many hours. He didn't hear her come up. She went to the ice well without a word. She scooped ice into a folded service towel, the way she had at 7 when the night was still climbing. And she came back and she took his forearm, gently, and she laid the cold towel across the wrist. He went still under her hands. "You're the only one who ever notices that," he said. "I know." 3 times. His voice was rough. "I covered for you 3 times. The night the walk-in failed, and you replated 40 covers off the cold line, and I told Brett it was a kitchen fix. The convention lunch you ran alone when Kayla called out. The wedding. The cake. When you caught the wrong tier, and I let him think the pastry chef flagged it." He looked down at the towel on his wrist, at her hand holding it there. "Every time I told myself I was protecting you, keeping you off his radar. That's a coward's version of protecting somebody, Dana. Real protection has your name on it. You put your name on it tonight. 6 years late. Tonight's not nothing." She pressed the ice a little firmer against the wrist. He winced and didn't pull away. "Hold that. 10 minutes. It swells if you don't. You gonna stay and time me?" She looked at him. The corridor was empty. The kitchen had gone quiet behind them. Just the hum of the coolers and the drip of a faucet. And the ballroom lights were off. And it was only the two of them, and the ice, and the smell of a room after everyone's gone home. "Yeah," she said. "I'll stay." And she did. The following Tuesday, at 10:40 in the morning, the phone rang in the event office. Brett took it because Brett took the client calls. He had his feet up on the desk, and a coffee going cold, and the post-event survey open on his screen. The survey he screened before it ever went up to ownership. The survey where a couple of nice notes had come in over the years that a certain server had never once been shown. It was Gordon Vance. Brett sat up, got the pen, started with the smooth voice, the "thank you for a wonderful evening" voice, the "we'd love to have you back" voice. Vance cut him off. "I'm going to give you a sentence," Vance said, "and I want you to write it down, because I want it to go up to whoever owns your hotel, word for word. Are you ready?" Brett said he was ready. He had the pen on the paper. "Everyone at our table," Vance said slowly, "remembered exactly one name from that night, and it was never on the program." Brett wrote it down. His own handwriting on his own pad, one word after another, the sentence building itself out under his hand like a bill coming due. "You got that?" Vance said. "I got it," Brett said. "Read it back to me." And Brett Coyle, event manager, careerist, the man who managed the room by looking at the head table and never at the floor, read the sentence back out loud in his own office. "Everyone at our table remembered exactly one name from that night, and it was never on the program." He read it like it cost him teeth. Because it did. What Brett didn't know yet, what he would find out that same afternoon, was that Vance's next call went to Cardinal Hospitality Group, the Alliance's own event contractor, the company that sat on the client's side of the table. And Cardinal called Dana Merrick. They offered her a salaried role. Banquet operations. 1,000 a year. Benefits. The real kind. The kind that covered a dependent. Start date the 1st of the month. The exact 1st of the month that Ruth's care went up. The exact clock that had been running against Dana the whole time stopped. Just like that. By the people who'd been sitting at the head table she wasn't supposed to be seen from. The hotel that passed her over for lead 3 times lost her to the client. She gave Brett her notice in person, stood in the same office where he'd read the sentence back. He tried a few things. He tried "you're valued here." He tried "we were about to talk about lead." He tried, finally, a small tight, "after everything we've done for you." Dana let him finish. Then she said the only thing she'd been saving. She said it dry, no heat in it, the way you'd read a cover count off a sheet. "You said I wouldn't know the difference." She picked up her allergen card off the desk, the laminated one with the colored tabs she'd made in her second year, and she put it in her pocket. You were right. I didn't know the difference. She looked at him. I do now. She left it there. The alderman kept the card. That was the strange small thing. After she was gone, somebody in the kitchen realized her laminated allergen card, the one she'd made by hand, was better than anything the house had ever issued, and they photocopied it and laminated it and clipped one to every captain's board, and it became the house standard. Her handwriting, her colored tabs, running the floor of a hotel that had never once said her name until a stranger said it for them. Object outliving the argument. Weeks later, on a slow Tuesday, Kayla Prentice stood in the center marquee section under the good chandeliers and complained that her tables were dead, that nothing was happening, that it was a boring night and she was bored. And across town, in a different ballroom, Dana Merrick stood next to a new hire at the Overflow tables against the kitchen wall, and she taught her the only rule that had ever mattered. You work these tables like they're the head table, Dana said. Every time. You want to know why? The new hire shook her head. Because the head table is where nothing's allowed to go wrong. Everybody's watching it, so it's careful, so it's fine. The overflow is where things actually go wrong. The seating errors, the missed flags, the plate that shouldn't have fired. She checked the card in her pocket, the habit she'd never lose. And here's the part nobody tells you. The place where things go wrong is the only place anyone ever really sees you. They gave me the table where things go wrong and forgot that's exactly where someone finally looks. She and Marcus still left through the service door at the end of the night. That hadn't changed. What had changed was that his name was on things now too. He'd started signing the log every night, every catch, hers and his and everyone's. 6 years of silence finally spent. He said it took him a lifetime to learn that quiet wasn't the same as loyal. She said it took her a lifetime to learn that the account where you do it right and the account where you get credited for it could, sometimes. Once in a while, if a stranger at a buried table happens to ask what's really in the sauce, finally, balance. Ruth stayed at Laurel Ridge. The raise took effect the first, and it was covered. And Dana sat with her on Sundays, and her mother didn't always know her name anymore, which was its own kind of hard. But the room was warm, and the bills were paid, and the clock had stopped running. They gave her the worst table in the room to make her invisible. It's the only place anyone ever notices you. If you've ever been the best on the floor and never once anyone's favorite, then you already know how this feels. Tell me the city you're serving from tonight. I want to see how far this one travels.